show my screen, so if everybody's there, and let me know when you see it, if I'm coming in loud and clear.
And in the meantime, if people wish to ask questions, just go ahead and type them into the questions box as well.
Yes, we are here for you, and that's the important thing is we want you to walk away with a very good experience on this. Is it coming through okay? You see the screen fine?
Yep, I see the screen.
Excellent.
Ready to go.
Excellent. So my name is Dan McCormick. I'm the lead solutions engineer for Alpha Software, and we have our weekly Q&A, and I do some demos. We are actually working on some really fun stuff that'll be presented in the next couple weeks. But I have today a real quick presentation demonstration regarding some built-in templates, and only take about 10 minutes or so, but really want to show, especially for the new people, how you can quickly get your solution up and running and not spend a lot of time trying to figure out things, just more of build it and then dissect it from there. And then obviously we want to answer any and all questions you have, so make sure to go ahead and put into the questions section of your GoToWebinar control panel any questions. We'll queue them up. Dave will manage that, and we'll try our best to answer your questions. Again, I like to always start out a little bit, on these kind of scenarios, is that we really feel that Alpha Software has developed Alpha Anywhere as the right tool, that right blend between a full-blown native development environment, which is very code intensive, and the other end of the spectrum, which is a app generator, which really allows you to generate something, but then you're kind of stuck. And what's nice about Alpha Anywhere is that we use a low-code methodology that allows you to develop and build things very quickly, and I'm going to demonstrate an example of that today. And on the flip side, have all the power to tweak it, to modify it, to make it work exactly the way you want to. That way you don't get to that 80–90% of your application and say, uh-oh, I can't, I've got to jump ship, I've got to do something differently. You'll never find that with Alpha. And what's really cool about Alpha Anywhere is the fact that it's a dynamic, changing platform, and the team, the development team, is continually adding new capabilities, new features to make your life easier. It's almost weekly we get to see new features and new capabilities. So with that, I'd like to do a quick demonstration today just to show you one of the cool built-in templates. So I'm going to get out of my presentation environment, and this is a great example of kind of the built-in templates, the ability for you to generate something very quickly, sort of an app generator concept, but to see all the power that's behind it. So Dave, can you see my development system?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Okay. And for those that are new to Alpha or just starting out, this is the Alpha development system. I've already created a new project, I call it demonstration, that will hold all my files. As you can see, I have a bunch of different existing files that I use for demonstrations and other pieces there. And also, just to let everybody know, I'm in the Web Projects control panel versus the control panel. And for those, the control panel is more of a historical. This is what the primary control panel was when Alpha was more of a standalone desktop development tool. And now the Web Projects control panel is where you really spend most of your time, because that's where all the web project different elements. And as you can see, we have different elements to our project, things like A5W pages, which are our scripted pages, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, etc. So what I want to do today is show you really quickly how you can create a very cool looking component for a mobile interface, one that you're probably very familiar with other technologies. So I'm in the Web Projects control panel. I'm going to click the New button up here in the left-hand corner. Okay. Now, again, I have a number of different things I can create. I could create HTML, CSS, but I'm creating a web component. So I'm going to go ahead and open up web component. Go to next here. Now I have a whole bunch of different components that are available, things like video players, image galleries, the app launcher, which we'll do a Dave will do a session on the app launcher in the very near future, because that's a very powerful tool for people who are doing multi-platform development. For our purposes today, I want to go ahead and open up what's called the UX. So I'm going to create a new UX, which is Alpha's equivalent to a form. So I'm going to go ahead and click this. Now this is super important, and you're going to see this as a design pattern throughout the Alpha Anywhere, is that one of the most challenging things for developers often is the blank page. It's like, where do I start? What handles do I pull? And sometimes Alpha, because it has so many diverse capabilities, we run into situations sometime where it gets a little confusing because there are a lot of ways to tweak and manage the system and update it and add your own pieces. So what I highly recommend, especially if you're developing, is use these templates. Alpha includes a whole bunch of different templates at different parts of the system with the intent of that new user, that person who wants to put together something very quickly and without having to do a whole bunch of pieces there. So what I'm going to pick here today is panel card with header title, buttons, and footer with button list. And this is a built-in essentially template that I find is a really powerful one for you to use to kind of start out with. I've also shown in the previous panel navigator with header and 3 panel cards, but today we're going to do it with a button list, which is very interesting and very cool. So I'm going to go ahead and select that from my list of templates, highlight it, click on it, and then I go down here to the OK button, and then I click on OK. Now the cool thing is normally you start with a set of nothing in here in terms of no items here. But in this case, I can go ahead and click here and go into my working preview. As you can notice, I've got a built-in, ready-to-go interface with buttons and other pieces here. And those are all built in and ready to go. And in fact, let me go ahead and create a different one. I want to actually create a new one that's got a little different feel to it. UX, where is it? Where is that one that, oh, where is that one I had? I'm sorry. It's not the two. So let me give you another example. So again, I want to show you a couple different examples. So for instance, this one right here, I've already got the basics of a interface with a title, with left and right buttons, and then a footer. And you'll see with most mobile applications, this is structured there. So let's take another example. Let's say I'm going to be doing more of a tablet interface. And I'd like to start out very quickly with a tablet kind of interface ready to go. So I'll click Web Component, I'll click UX, click Next, and what I'd like to do is, in this case, what I'm going to do is go to the mobile app framework with 2-panel responsive layout. So here's another example of it. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So now you're going to notice in here that it's pre-built all my components here. You have a panel header and a panel footer. So now I can go into this, and you're going to see here is a different thing. So as you can see, there's a different structure to it that's already been pre-built with 2 side-by-side panels, with noting that these scroll with information there. Another example of this, if I go into and create a new UX component, and I'll go to UX, and let's say I want to do a sample disconnected app. So I could click on that. And now built into it is a much more extensive capability where we've already built a pre-built disconnected application. And let me go ahead and show you what that looks like. Okay, oh, I've got to have my database set up here. And you'll notice that when they do this, you'll notice in here that it not only built the controls for me, but it also gives me some information. So in this case, it requires a Northwind MDB file, and it's called Northwind. So in this case, it's telling me for this to operate, I need a connection string called Northwind. So let me go ahead and go into my connection screen builder, which I've covered in previous ones. I'll go ahead and, you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename this one as that, because I know it points to my database there. So we'll close there. I'll go back into my environment here. Is that called Northwind? Let me make sure I've set that up correctly. Tool, I have to go Northwind. So it gives you instructions when you're putting these templates together. It puts these instructions in there. So now let's see if it works okay with the new updated. Okay. So I can do a search and I can say, ANCO or something like that, and it's showing me a set of searched records. I can also I can go in and add records where I have my customer ID and company and user ID. I can delete a record. I can search for records. So I can search. So let me fetch those. I don't think I have my things there, so not the best example. I apologize, everybody there. But you'll notice that in here, it's a fairly complicated structure. And what's great about this is that you can easily and quickly, very quickly, use this as your jumping off point. And that's the important thing I want to get across, is that instead of starting with a blank page, use these templates, because these templates will allow you to quickly kind of say, okay, great, I've got something that works. Now I can dissect it. I can understand, oh, I see what's in the panel header. I can see what these buttons are doing. I can see the list. I can see what this button for delete record does. And then what are these control groups and things like that. And it's a really powerful way for you to create your application. There's also another method you can do this. You can actually create a blank UX component like I did before, right here, UX, and then I can just say click OK, and I'm going to start with a blank one. So this would normally be how you started. So again, that's the idea of, it's kind of a writer's block thing, is we don't want you to get stuck on here. So now I can go down here to containers and actually panels, and I have this area called quick panels. So not only do we have kind of these templates at the top level, but even here you can go ahead and, instead of starting with a blank page, you can click on quick panels, and then as you can see, we've got predefined quick panels in here. Split view with icons and split view with icons and panels. So I'm going to select that one because that one's a very powerful one that's used often. And then I click OK, and you'll notice that the system automatically generates my UX for me, including a panel layout setup, some menu items, a menu list here, and a bunch of panel cards. And if you'll notice up here, there's also a comment here that you can open this up, and it tells you how this works. So therefore, you don't have to have it as a mystery. You can read this, look at here, and it will actually show you kind of the notes of what's going on here. And if I actually show you the working preview and go into the working preview, you'll notice I have an initial panel. Actually, let me go ahead and make this look like a mobile, and I'll click mobile up here and go back into my working preview so it looks a little bit normal. So I'll go ahead and go to an iPad for horizontal. So you'll notice that we have a header. On the left-hand side, we have a menu, and in the middle, we have content. So if I click menu 1, you'll notice that this changed here, and the header changed. If I go menu 2, you'll notice this changed, 3, 4, 5. And as you can see, it's handling all that for me. So now I can go back in here and say, okay, I've got a menu and I've got my panel cards. I can look at my menu list here. I can look at my panel cards and start adjusting and modifying this and making this work the way I want it to do. Now, what's really neat too about this is that you can learn a little bit more in terms of reading documentation about, for instance, the orientation. So let's go back into working preview, and let's go ahead and go to an iPhone 5 vertical, and you'll notice something. We only see the panel card, we don't see the menu, because you'll notice there's a button up here where I can click that button, and notice what happened. It popped out my menu. And again, this you see with mobile platforms all the time. And as I collect the different pieces, it shows the different panel cards, etc. So instead of trying to figure that out on your own, it's already built into here, and you can actually go in and read up these component levels, and it will tell you, how did it do that? How did it take this panel card menu list, and instead of having it as a static one, how did it make a pop-up button? Like I've got this menu button right here, and if I click, so what does that menu button do right there, and how is it associated with this list? And all of that is documented in the notes that are included with this component to explain exactly about, well, if you go to a smaller form side, it's going to show an icon in the header, and the menu panel will be shown, etc. So I just wanted to show you that you never have to start out with a blank slate. start by using these templates, because what it will allow you to do is quickly start getting a framework for what you want to do. And in these frameworks, you can learn from those frameworks and then adjust them and modify them to your own. So in fact, I often start with these as my starting point for my applications, especially in the prototype phase, because I can get something up and running very, very quickly. Just within a matter of an hour, I can have a new application up and running. And then you can work on then, okay, how do we want to modify? How do we want to tweak it so the interface works exactly how the client or the business user decides they want it to use? So that was my kind of quick and dirty intro into templates. And again, you can access the templates two ways. When you create a new component, specifically a UX component, you're given a whole bunch of different templates that you can grab, and this will allow you to kind of start with that framework there. The alternative method you can use, and the method I used in here, is you can go to the quick panels area on the UX builder, click on here, and we have a series of predefined examples that you can click on to then put into your system. And it's very, very powerful because you know, there's tons of different ones here. You know, you can do things like menu icons, panel navigator with two cards, header, footers, etc. Very straightforward stuff. You know, very broad base of templates that you can start out with. So that's my kind of intro there, is that never start with a blank page, because you can save yourself an enormous amount of time and energy and frustration by starting out with a template. And then once you got a feel for how the template works, how it's operating, then it's very straightforward for you to then take the next step and go ahead and modify it and tune it to your specific requirements. And I find that's the most effective way to quickly start developing your applications and to get as far into developing your application as possible, as quickly as possible, and not get stuck. So that's kind of my quick overview today of templates and why they're so powerful, and why Alpha makes sure to include that into the system for new and experienced developers. Because experienced developers, they want to get out a prototype fast. There's no reason for you to do that. And by the way, last thing I want to let you know is that you can create your own templates and save those templates as future ones. So if you come up with a certain design you really like, you can create these templates. Basically, it creates a template of an existing one that allows you very quickly to create your own templates, and that accelerates development even further. And we'll do that in a future session, is to show you how to go ahead and create your own templates, which will help improve your productivity in a big, big way. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and open up the floor for any questions, comments. Did I miss something? Did I go too quickly through that? Let me know, because I don't want to lose anybody, and I want to make sure that you get a successful overview of how templates work today.
Great. So a couple questions. Let's start with the first one, which I think will be the shorter one, which has to do with, you know, you're in the design, you're laying out panel cards, but in that that middle piece there, what are the colors for? Why are some of those things green
That's
and
a
some
really
orange?
good point.
Yeah.
As you can see, over time, things can get a little busy. You can start seeing a whole bunch of different pieces here. So the normal is kind of a green color here. What this is called a panel header. And if I'm in my working preview, you're going to notice up here I have this area up top, and I'll go to like an iPad 4. That's a panel header, and actually you could have something called a panel footer. So now when I go back in here, and let's say I want to go ahead on this panel layout and add a panel footer, you'll notice that it puts it down at the bottom, but it also color codes it. And that allows you to quickly visually kind of find the panel header and the panel footer. So that, so in fact, let me go ahead and put a piece of information in there. So I'll go ahead and put a piece of stack text, hello team. So now when I go into my working preview, I'm going to have a panel header up top and a panel footer down below here. You'll notice the color doesn't do anything as far as the color on the screen. That's dictated by your CSS. So when you're in your system and you go to properties and you select the style, say iOS 7, and I got that through the properties field, and I go into my working preview. The coloring actually on screen and is done, it's kind of a lighter gray. It's not that olive right now. Um, the coloring in here is just merely a design tool to allow you to do that. Now, another area coloring comes into, which is very, very powerful, is let's say I'm going to add a container in here. And containers are sort of like panels, but they're a component that holds other controls. But you'll see I have a whole bunch of different types of containers. So for instance, the panel header is actually a type of container. It's just a special one that sticks itself to the top or bottom of a panel layout. But I could also have something, for instance, such as a absolute layout, which we've demonstrated in the past, where you have a situation where you're using a graphic image and you're overlaying fields on that. If I were to insert that in here, you'll notice that it has its own unique coloring scheme of red. And again, the idea behind this is that just to give you some visual indicators of the different types of components. So you can say, oh, I'm looking for like a header or a footer, that's going to be orange. Oh, I'm looking for my absolute layout, that's going to be red. And it just gives you some visual handling there that allows you to do it. And a couple other things that they've included, which is very powerful in the system, are these comments. So these you can add yourself. So for instance, if I want to put a comment in front of this menu list, I can click where I want to put the comment, and then you'll notice it's a little hard to see, but I have a little comment / here. If I click on that, I can say, here is a test comment, and click OK. And you'll notice now, for this panel card, it's added a test comment right here. And so I can actually sit there and look at that test comment and see what that comment is. So as my gets a little complicated, so maybe on this panel card action number 1, I'm going to say, here is where the customer picture is. So now I can kind of give myself a guide of where, some commenting on the user interface. Obviously, you can comment in the code. One of the benefits of this is that if you're working in a multi-team environment, it's going to be much faster and effective for your teammate to look at this control and be able to identify what it is. So again, the coloring is for visual design capability to help you out during the design process. And the comments are also there just to help you document your application, give yourself hints, because trust me, after you get going a while, you could come back 2 weeks from now and go, how did I structure that? I mean, you get very busy, and these comments can be very valuable, and they're put into it. So that's just a little bit of a bit about the commenting and how that works.
Excellent, thank you. Next question is, you had mentioned something about an app launcher and about accessing the same app from different places. But the question is, when you're developing, do you have to create different programs for each type of cell phone or tablet?
That's a really good question, and the answer is no. What's great about this system is that you can develop a single UX that can modify itself in terms of how it runs on these different devices. And there's 2 structural ways to do that. First, which I kind of showed here, and I'm going to get rid of this absolute layout here. I don't know why it's still there. I'll go ahead and delete that. Let me get rid of that. So it'll run properly because I threw that in there. And I'll go ahead and get rid of my panel footer so everything is back to what it was originally. Okay, so one of the key things about this is that some people, especially people who are newer to Alpha, they go, well, wait a minute, how come I don't have a drag and drop kind of interface? Why don't I be able to say, okay, I have a data control here of a text box, and I want to drag that on and I want to line it up there? Well, the reason for that, or the primary reason, is the fact that we are deploying for mobile platforms and web, so you really can't guarantee the exact screen size and other things like that. So Alpha uses the panel layout and panel concepts there. And let me go ahead, and I'm sorry there, guys. I didn't turn off my
Notifications.
I have to turn off my yeah, notifications still on there. Bad practice there. Let me go ahead and turn that off real quick so we don't bother anybody. And we'll go ahead and do not disturb. Okay, we'll go back into our environment. So using this panel layouts are what are called responsive in design. So therefore they can size themselves dynamically. So there's two elements of when you're deploying an application that in terms of multi-platform. One is the size of the device. Is it a tablet? Is it a phone? Is it a, how many pixels are the density of the thing? Is it a newer, higher resolution phone or an older phone? Those kind of scenarios. And as you can see, there's lots of different platforms out there. So the panel layouts take care of a lot of your sizing issue. So if you'll notice in here that if I'm in an iPad, I have sort of the menu over here on the left, and then the data here. But if I go down to an iPhone 5, you'll notice that I don't have as much screen real estate. So now I can use these flyout menus to optimize my application versus having to have it. So therefore, right off the bat, I don't have to create two UXs, one for a tablet and one for a phone. I can use panel layouts and these tricks to dock certain panels. So what this is that panel is still there, but it's being docked. It's being hidden over here to the side. And when I click this button, it's undocking it and moving it out for you to see, and then the moment I touch something, it's going back in. So to answer your question first, no, you don't have to create separate layouts for the different devices. Now, the question becomes this. If you'll notice, I selected, when I went to the properties, I selected something here called style name. And I can select a Android or an iOS. Well, you don't want to fix that because this application could be running on a iPhone or an Android or a Windows Mobile. So it could be a different style. So I can select kind of my primary one, but also built into the alpha system is what's called the responsive layout settings. And there's actually a webinar that we did about this. Now, the cool thing about responsive layout settings is that you can intelligently modify the CSS of the system using this. So for instance, I'm going to go ahead and again, I'm in the properties of this UX control. I'm going to go into responsive layout. I'm going to add a rule. And what this rule is going to say was, well, okay, is the device Safari, i.e. it's on there? Is the device Windows or iPhone or a Galaxy, or is it Android? So I can actually dynamically determine what platform I'm running on. So I don't have to know about that ahead of time. I can say, you know what, I'm going to build a single UX that's going to size itself properly and is going to look great on Windows or Android or desktop. It depends on what it is. So I can define this rule saying, okay, if the device is Android, okay, that's my rule, and I'll call this Android. Now what I can do is say, okay, if this UX control detects I'm on Android, I can now perform an action where I can modify the properties on a panel navigator, on a panel card. I could define the size of the controls. I can modify properties. I could run a piece of JavaScript to do something interesting. So what this allows you to do is to dynamically change the properties of the UX when you've identified this scenario. And so therefore, you don't have to build separate UX for every target. You merely build one UX and add these responsive layout genies. And so you may have a situation where, okay, right now we're using the same panel layout, but you could actually put another set of panel cards that are optimized for a certain platform and say when this device is shown, show them these cards versus these cards. It's like showing different hands of cards that are on there. You can also modify the CSS. So you can say, okay, if you're on an Android, use this set of CSS. If you're on a Windows device, use this or there. So therefore, not only will it change the layout, but it will change the look and feel. And the beauty of this is you don't have to end up creating a bunch of different UXs. You just merely create the UX and then use the responsive design. And again, we have a webinar out there that's available on our videos page that will allow you to go in and modify, walk through how that works and see an example of it actually put together and demonstrated right in front of yourself. So a
Excellent.
bit long-winded, but I wanted to make sure you understood kind of the power of the system and why we don't use a what you say, what you get. We tend to use more of the the panel layout, which gives you enormous flexibilities and saves you development time over the long haul.
So, very related question to that, and I think you've touched on most of the answer to that just in the last couple of minutes, but from a different person who's writing in. So the question was, can Alpha Anywhere recognize an iOS device versus an Android device? And yes, yes, it can.
Yep,
And can it
it
display
used
a
to be
different panel? And he said, and here's sort of the use case he's going after. He says, he asked because he has iOS users and they have different expectations of the interface than the Android users. He said, for example, Androids typically don't have a back button in the header. They like to use the back button on the device.
that great question, and that's exactly what the responsive layout. So let me go ahead and go here and say, I'll say rule name is Android, and I'll insert the field of if device is Android. Okay, now I'm going to add an action, and what I want to do is select the active layout in a list, or I'm sorry, um, it's probably going to be JavaScript. What I'll do is run a piece of JavaScript. And in this JavaScript here, I can say, and bear with me, and you could use action JavaScript here, but I'm going to just code it for simplicity. But I could open up action JavaScript that does this for me, but I can say dialog.object.panel set active. Let's say I want panel action 3. So the idea would be you would create either a panel navigator or panel layout that has that specific layout on your screen. So you may have 2 of them on either side of it. And then what you can do is when the device is Android, it's going to fire this little JavaScript and immediately show the user that panel. And so that's a quick and dirty way for you to set the panels there. You can also hide and unhide things. So like for instance, instead of having separate panels, you could have 2 different types of controls in your header and hide some and not hide some. So there's a lot of really fun things you can do, but that's exactly what this is for, is that when it detects a certain platform or condition, you could run JavaScript, you can make some other things, and in this, it will then go to that panel that's optimized for that platform. And again, the idea is if you can keep everything in one UX or as few UXs, your cost of development, your cost of maintenance go down, because each time you have a change, you don't have to go and change 4 or 5. You can change, 1 or 2, and you be ready to rock and roll. So.
Excellent. Okay. A slightly different topic. So the question that we have here has to do with what they're referring to as dynamic groups, and what they mean is dynamic security groups. What they mean is they want to be able to create users and assign them to different groups, so that depending on the group that you're in, you might get a different set of choices or a different menu in your application. Can Alpha Anywhere do that?
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, you want the ability with the web projects or web security is run that question by me again. I want to make sure I really have it.
Let's say you're an administrator and you've created some users. So now all the users have the same app, but depending on who you are when you log in, can you get different choices or even a different menu?
Oh, very good point. Okay, yes, and that's through what's called the web security environment. Is this one on? No. I'm going to go ahead and bear with me. I'm going to open up an existing project that I have just to be able to show you how this works. So I'm opening up, I just opened up a different project, and as you can see, you start to get a fair number of controls, but this is a very large application here. So I'm going to go into web security, and I'm going to go into users and groups. Okay, so first is when you define your security, you can create different groups. And these groups are buckets that would hold users. And so I have a very simple set of one, like administrators, super users, and then users. It's a very straightforward application structure there. You can obviously change some more. So you could have like managers, things like that. Now what you can do, which is very powerful, is that when you create a user, you can assign them to one or many of the different groups. So the power of that is that everybody is, it's not a one-to-one, it could be a one-to-many, meaning that a person could actually be a member of a couple of groups, which give you enormous amount of flexibility, because then what happens is when you log in, you can say, oh, this person has manager's rights. They're a user, but they have manager's rights, but they don't have administrator rights there. So what you can do is you can define your groups, and then when you develop your users, you can select what group they're a member of. Now, once you're starting to develop your application, and I'm going to go ahead and go in here and I'm going to create a new UX control. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and create a blank one for now. And I'm going to add some controls in here. I'll go text box 1, text box 2, text box 3. Okay, so you've defined those levels of groups. So what's going to happen is when the person logs in, it's going to look up and say, oh, this person is a member of these groups, depends on there. Now, in your application, let's say, for instance, text box 3, only super users can see text box 3. So the default is when you add a new control to your system, it's going to automatically show that to everybody. It's sort of like, okay, anybody can access that there. But if you select that text box, let's say text box number 3, and I scroll down here to my security groups area here, and every control has this security groups in here, then I'm going to select that here, and now it's showing me, okay, here are your different security groups. So for instance, for text box 3, only super users can use that. Now the cool thing about that is that you're done. The system will automatically hide or show that text box depending on the user's login permissions. So if the person logging in is a member of super users, they will be able to see text box number 3. If they do not have that access, let's say they're an administrator or a user, then they will not see that. And you can do this. So you can say, for instance, text box 3 is only there. Text box number 2, I'm going to click on text box number 2 and go to security groups. And I'm going to say administrators and super users can only see that. So now when someone logs in, if they're a member of either of those groups, they're going to see that. But the only people who can see text box 3 are the super users. Now this is applied, I'm doing this and applying this at the control level. But when you're in your project and you have your different components, your grids, your UX, you can actually click and right-click on it and allow you to say a component has a login. So for instance, let's say you had a component that edits some very important fields that you only want super users to be able to see that. You can right-click on the component, go down to Component Security, go to Requires Login and click that, and you'll notice it brings up the exact same kind of menu there. And I say, you know what? For this right here, the only people who can see this are super users. And so the beauty of that is you can really lock down your application where not only can you hide individual controls, because sometimes maybe you have a manager who gets signing authority. So you give them a drop-down box where they can set that, sign off on like a control. Well, that's a control level behavior. You want to be able to do that. But maybe there's a UX component that allows you to edit sensitive data that you want to make sure the only people who can do it is, say, super users. You use this technique right there. And that way you can lock down your application at the component level and also below that to actually at a higher level, which is at the component level, but then also at the lower level with controls. And again, since the user, when they log in, is assigned a user sort of permissions, the system has that data to be able to make sure they only get to see what they should see.
Excellent. Couple more questions along those lines. Let's start with the one that you, I think, mostly covered, but we'll go through it. And this has to do with sessions and about people being able to log in, see pages or not see pages. So here's the question. So it's about a session. If we code in PHP, we'll often use a session or save a user ID so that to acknowledge that's a session. And then as you go from page to page in the application, they refer back to that to check to see whether or not the person is already logged in or not logged in, and to see whether or not they have access to that page. Is this So in other words, is this what you're saying the security system will do for you?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what it'll do. Now, it's a very good point. You do also have the ability to use session variables for other purposes like grids and things like that. So what I do is when the person logs in, I send them to a page where I set some session variables, and that's other associated data that may not be security related. Like often I'll put their first name and their last name. So if I want to display that on a page, I don't have to do a database lookup. I can just display that on there. So the background on this is that you can kind of use both. You can use the primary way to control security is through the method I just showed you, because that's the most fixed and it's handled by the app server. So it's making sure things happens. But you can do your own pieces by setting your own session variables, and then that session variable information is available throughout your application. So you could actually, in fact, be able to create a session variable and then do a client-side show hide of, say, a control if you would like so.
Excellent. So what you're showing us here is code, and there have been some questions about, okay, so what code is used when you create these templates? Like, what are we using for the coding for that?
Oh, well, what's interesting is that when you're building these right here, you're not coding anything at all. The idea behind it is that you drag and drop, and you can adjust things such as all the parameters are a matter of done by through a point and click kind of methodology.
Right.
Now, what you can do though is that obviously you're going to want to add behaviors and interactivity. So what we do, and I'll go ahead and put in a button control here. And so if I want to add interactivity or I want to do something within the system, I can first and foremost, if it's client side, I can click on this button, and then you'll notice that this button has a series of events that are available: clicking, swiping, etc. So I can go over here to this button, I can say click there, and then I can add a new action. Now alpha uses when you have interactivity on the device, whether it's a web browser or a mobile device, that is JavaScript. So you could actually literally code JavaScript in here. But what alpha does, which is very powerful, is allow you to create your own JavaScript. So for instance, if I want to show a message box to the user, so for some reason when I want to pop up a message box, I can look inside of my rich set of action JavaScripts, things that can do mapping, pops-ups, messages, and things like that. But I'm going to click message box. Then it brings up a genie, and it can say, okay, let's see, let's just go hi team. And the buttons I want to have is okay. It could be okay cancel. And then it's going to return that there. And I could set and use in advance. So now what I do is click OK. It's creating that message box. So let me go ahead and go into working preview and show you how that works. When I click button, you'll notice it brought up a little thing with the hi team. So you'll notice I didn't write any code there. Now what's going on behind the scenes is very powerful. If I reopen that behavior and I look at it, all it's doing is writing a little piece of JavaScript for me. This is a very simplistic example. But when you start getting into mapping and manipulating lists and data, you can do that. Now, as I showed before, we could actually start typing JavaScript if we knew it, but for people who are just starting out, there's no real reason for you to have to do that. You can just merely go ahead and start doing these pieces in here. So you can use Action JavaScript as a way to build your knowledge there. Now, that's for adding interactivity on the front end. If you want to add server-side behaviors, you have two items. So let's say you wanted to code something on the server side that did a specific calculation or a database lookup or something like that. And that's a little beyond today, but you would use what's called XBasic, and you would do a callback. So you could create a callback to the server and then use the XBasic language, which is like Visual Basic or Basic, to type in some code to do a lookup in a table and make a calculation and then send that data back to the user interface. You can also now use server-side JavaScript with Node.js. So if you're very familiar with JavaScript, you can actually code up routines on the server side with JavaScript and have that return the data back to the front end. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of your method. So if you're adding behaviors on the front end, you can use action JavaScript to get kickstarted, but then you can use any kind of JavaScript. And then if you're doing server-side operations, what you can be doing is then use your either XBasic or server-side JavaScript to do that from that standpoint.
Excellent. So actually, a bunch more questions here.
Wow, a lot. It's good question
It's
week.
it's a
Usually it's
great
like,
question week. Last week, I think we even broke early. We ran out of stuff to talk about, and I'm
yeah,
not
you're
sure we're going
like,
to get to everything. So
for God's
please
sake,
defend me.
ask a
I
question.
know. All right. Here's a great question. I said, now, if a new device comes along in the future, like let's say the iPhone 12, how would you
Yes,
get?
I've already got my order in on
Do you
that.
have it for the excellent?
Yeah,
I've
I've already
started.
given my money to Apple because they don't have enough money, so that they make sure they build that.
I was wondering what that line was outside the Apple Store. Okay, wonderful. But anyway, how would you get your application updated to the new complete project? In other words, how do you push down some sort of update to make it work? Do you have to have an alpha support person do this? Is there some sort of code or something, or how do you go
Well,
about that?
like for instance, yeah, like let's say there's a new device out there. What will happen is Alpha will rev our development system, and we have those available at all times, so you can download that development system. And then, as I was talking about before, let's say it's a responsive layout, a new one. So they created a new rule that had like, is the device iOS 5002, or is it 3D virtual screen capable, etc. So you will need to rev your app to handle those new type of capabilities, but then you can either publish it. If you're going through the web browser, you can use our publishing feature, which will publish it up to your web browser. The next time someone hits your system, they're going to get the latest and greatest code. If it's a situation where it's a mobile app that you've created, then you can go in here to PhoneGap and go in here and you can create a new app and upload that and have it available for your users to download the newest and greatest application. And so then you would have sort of a build process where you would take your application, you would put it up on the PhoneGap build with all the new features, send that link to your users, and then they could download that new app, which would allow you to handle those new pieces there. I do know the development team is working on, there's a technique called refresh where you can actually update things within the app, and they're working on being able to enable that. But there's a lot of restrictions around there given by the platform manufacturers, the mobile platforms, because they're very concerned of people putting in malicious things. So they want to be very careful about self-updating apps because they need to make sure from a security standpoint, someone doesn't corrupt your app kind of scenario. So those are your two options, is either if it's a web-based, mobile, web browser-based, you just put it up to your server. Next time someone logs in, they're going to get the latest and greatest code. If it is a PhoneGap project, meaning it's a standalone app, what you would do is rebuild and publish that app, and they'd be able to download that app and update it on their phone or tablet device.
Great. Jumping back to security just for one more second, the example you showed shows that you create the groups on the developer side, but could you have your admin either create new groups or create users and assign them to those groups from the website, so that they don't have to log into this developer thing and republish stuff? Can you make like a web interface that they could log into and create all that, and maybe even create a new group, even if they needed to do that?
And the answer is yes. There's actually two methods to do that. One is you can do it in code. Just to let you know, is there's a full set of functions that allow you to do that in code. But to make your life even easier is that I'm going back into the development system, going to Web Components. If I click New and go to Web Component and UX, we've actually got a whole series of security framework pre-built components. So for instance, create new user account. Create new user account and add that information to a related table. So Alpha has these pre-made templates. So for instance, if you want to edit an account for an existing user and assign them different privileges, this is the component you would do. So you just click OK, You'll notice it's already pre-built the component with all the pieces in it. Actually, I'll show you the working preview. You can't run it. Let's see if it's live preview. I can do it here and just see what you do. Okay. Yeah, I'm in my prototype here, so that's not doing it there. I don't have it web, but what happens is it builds a whole component that now the user can be updated. You can change their roles, you can change their password and their name. So yes, you can create a completely self-service web-based interface that's out there so that you don't have to use the development system to maintain that.
And if you wanted to do groups, that would also be a possibility, though it doesn't look
That
like
is
it
correct.
in the built-in
I'm
link. You
not
probably
sure.
want
I
to
don't
send it.
know if there's a pre-built UX control. Let me see if there is one for adding groups. If not, there are function calls that can be done, which are very simple to allow you to, yeah, to create groups. That's something a little bit more custom, but again, very easy to use. The only question you have on that is that if you create those new groups, how do you apply them to the controls and stuff like
Right,
that?
which I thought there are
You really
functions
have
for
to do
applying
that
pages to
through.
groups, though. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's kind of groups are kind of a back office kind of feature, whereas users and editing their privileges and things like that's kind of a can be done on a front office basis.
Easily. Okay. Another question. This has to do with the styling again of the applications. And he says, is it possible to use a skin like Wrap Bootstrap on Alpha Anywhere pages?
The answer is yes. Basically, how Alpha works and how these controls work is that we're just using CSS files. So all the controls and everything else is just inheriting CSS. So the look and the feel is determined completely by that CSS. So you can actually develop and implement your own CSS, and you can include your own JavaScript and CSS in the applications. You can even include your own third-party tools. Like I've had some people insert things like JavaScript libraries to capture keystrokes and things like that. So the system is very open in terms of enhancing it using those capabilities. And so the real benefit of that for you is that you can go out and get a really good CSS person who's very creative and make your application look and feel completely different from our standard out-of-the-box applications.
Great. We have a question here about hosting. Where do you host? What does it cost? How do you do it? That kind of thing.
Good question. Our preferred host, the people we work with a lot, is called ZebraHost,
Right.
and they're specialists in hosting alpha applications. So what's great about that is they know how to quickly set up and create your environment, get it running, and answer your questions, and make sure alpha is running
And
optimally there.
they use IBM's software as the backend for their.
That's correct.
Right.
SoftLayer is the actual
So it goes through.
provider of the
It's an IBM
service.
product for the backend, but ZebraHost sort of manages the interface between you and IBM. And from everyone who's worked with them, they can get you set up really, really quickly because they know an awful lot about Alpha Anywhere. They pre-install the servers for you. If you need to do load balancing or something like that down the road, they can handle that. As far as costs, I think it's the $40 to $50 a month. Get you started with a system that'll give you pretty good traffic and throughput, but you probably want to talk to them directly. So just to find out more, but it's ZebraHost, ZebraHost.com. Again, they're the specialists and the people we prefer to work with. You don't have to. You can work with anyone. We do have a video up showing how to host on a GoDaddy virtual dedicated server. But anyone who offers, basically what you need is you need a machine that's running a copy of Windows at which you have administrative privileges that you can install your own software. So like an Office 365 or Google Drive, one of those wouldn't work, nor would one of the really, really cheap hosting accounts where you're just putting up web pages. So you do need to be able to log into a Windows environment. Those machines can go for basically $30 up per month is usually sort of is the range on those.
Yeah, considering the fact that alpha, and this is very important for people to understand, is that alpha doesn't like meter the number of users that are using a server or the number of applications that are on that server. It's really a matter of how much horsepower your server can provide, your users so that they don't, have slow response time. So alpha is an extremely cost-effective solution because it allows you to, get on board quickly, get your initial server up and running. Then you can scale your platform as you need it and as is required. And it's really the only way to fly. It's very, very cost effective, very, very powerful.
All right, here I've got a more technical question for you, Dion, which is
Okay.
can you create action JavaScript, or for that matter, even JavaScript that runs on the server side?
Uh, yeah, you can create what's called server-side JavaScript using Node.js. Action JavaScript really just generates pure JavaScript that runs on the the um, the client or the front end piece now. Now, one thing that Alpha is working on, which is pretty cool, is that, and actually they demonstrated it at the event, the developers conference, was the ability for you to use to convert XBasic into JavaScript and back and forth, and also be able to leverage both libraries kind of two ways. So, for instance, you could call an XBasic function from inside server-side JavaScript. Pretty cool stuff, just pure demonstration right now. But the right now there's no sort of action JavaScript for the server side. What you'll really be doing is coding up modules with functions and things like that. So it's more of a pure coding kind of scenario. And I'm not going to go in now, but they added some really cool features with the latest release where you can actually create code modules that can be reused over multiple projects that become your kind of repository for your server side things. And what's cool about that is that it promotes reuse, and I anticipate very soon you'll be able to get third-party libraries that will allow you to quickly do things like, maybe like a 3D graphics library or something like that. So a lot of very fun stuff on there.
Another quick question about hosting. This has to do with, okay, hosting your application, sure, that has to be out on a server. What about the data, though? Does the data have to be on the same server, or can it be some other place?
The answer is it can be on a different place. Your there's actually three ways you can store data, as obviously as flat files or, media files and things like that. So for instance, in that scenario, you could actually have all your data up on Amazon Web Services and be able to have them serve up that content directly to the mobile device. So you don't even need to have your static files on the same server. Now with a database, same thing. You could actually have your database server on a completely different machine, and the app server will tie to that, and you could have multiple databases tied to that. And then last but not least is that if you want to connect to web services, so you might have a situation where you have a third-party web service, or your company has already generated a web service around some of their internal data, you can actually call that, and that resides on a separate machine than your system. So it's very, it's kind of like it's the network. You can connect anything to anything, and really allows you to distribute the parts of your applications and what you do from that standpoint. So
Excellent. We are running short on time. I know we can get a question or two in, but before we do that, looking through the questions, I realize a lot of them have been answered much more extensively in some of the webinars, especially the ones having to do with security and things like that. So I was wondering, Deanna, if you would mind going to our events page just to give people a quick
by
tour
all
of what they
means, I'd
can
be
find.
glad to do that.
So we do record, especially our theme-based webinars. We do record most webinars, but some of them we publish up, the ones that are of particular interest, we publish to alphasoftware.com/events.
Okay.
Oops.
I'm sorry. I put alpha anywhere.
I know. Look at that, John. You do have to type the right URL in.
Yeah, pilot error. Okay. There we go.
Loading. So one of the first things you see on this page are the videos from our developer conference, but you can scroll down past that if you don't mind.
Ooh, ugly, man. You don't want to see. We got to talk. You don't scare away our customers here. They're like,
It's a picture of Dion with
oh,
the
there was my
offline image
lunch.
capture. So let's take a look at setting up the alpha
By the way,
security
you
for.
notice that we do this. You notice everybody that we do this at 1 o'clock after you've had your chance to eat lunch. At least for the East Coast folks, just because of that reason. So here's the Alpha Security Framework.
So that's a great webinar. Step by step shows you what the framework does, how to use it, how to set it up, and how to make modifications to it so that you can use it with your own backend things. There was also a question about someone was asking you sort of about updating stuff. You might want to updating your applications as they come out. One way people do that is using their own sort of private web store. So when you boot up an application, it says, hey, there's an update available. Even if you're on an iOS device, it doesn't have to pull that application from the Apple Store. You can have your own private store. And there's a company called Aperion that we work with that does that and a whole bunch of other things. So they charge you some user fee per month per user. I think it's in the $3 to $5 range. But if you have a serious web application, it could do other things too. It can wipe data off your phone, and it could do a great deal of other things as well. That's in the Appearance integration thing below. And if you want to scroll down a little bit, there are a
Sure.
couple more.
There's the Aperion one.
Yeah. So let's get going. That was the software as a service framework. If you're building an application that you're planning to sell out as a software as a service, we have just also a general introduction to
About a
Alpha Anywhere
man.
by Selwyn Ravens, who's the co-founder. He's also sort of the chief architect of our software. Someone had asked about Alpha Anywhere and IIS. It's one of the questions there, and we actually have a webinar that was put together by our lead IIS engineer, Terry Smith. The IIS module is available today. So instead of having people run the Alpha Anywhere server, what we offer is the ability for people to run IIS with a Alpha plugin inside. And let's see what else we have for questions, because I think we had a couple of other ones that might be addressed here. Don't know that we
Salesforce, and
have
then
one
you get more
on
Bob
mapping.
Moore's stuff. If you're doing PhoneGap, look for Bob Moore's stuff.
Absolutely, yep. So that's a really good thing for people who are doing mobile apps. Let me look what else is here. So I think that'll do it for the webinars. We did have a session up in our conference about using Wrap Bootstrap, Bootstrap Wrap with Alpha Anywhere. We might have another webinar coming up on that one as well. Let's see what else we've got. That's the IIS question. Oh, another one has to do with just a straight up feature question is, can we do mapping? Like, can you show an address on a map or a route or something like that? Does Alpha Anywhere
Yeah,
support mapping?
actually, I'll show you a real quick demonstration of that.
We are running 2
Let's
minutes
go ahead
over,
and,
so this will be our last question. But
yeah, this will be our last
hang in
question.
there, yeah.
I'll do this real quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and go File, new, we want a new web component, and I'm going to do a UX here. Okay, I'm going to click OK. Then I'm going to go into my controls. So I have a blank UX. You could obviously use one of the templates, which I highly recommend. But then I can put a map component on here, and I can call this map. And you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and wrap this in a panel, because I like to have things in panels for a good reason I'll show you in a moment. Insert around. So I have just a map component in here. And so I go to my map component and I want to consume, I want to fill that container. So I want to make sure it fills up the complete panel card. So now I'm going to go into my map, or actually I have my map right here. I can actually literally go over here and put in, where is it? Center map on location. Okay. And then I can put the longitude and latitude of where I want that map to be. But I want to use a little different method to do that. So let me go ahead and change that a little bit. And by the way, since we have the ability to read the GPS information on the phone, you could actually use that where a map can literally read its current location on the phone. Let me go ahead and go in here, and I'm going to go ahead and add a new panel card. And I'm going to insert that before. And I'm going to create a address. So I'll go address, city, state, zip. Okay. So I'm actually going to go ahead and create a couple fields here. So the default value is going to be, oh, and I have to put the piano card, sorry. Okay, so go ahead and read off, what's the address there in up there in Massachusetts, where you're at, Dave? Um, let's just make one up then. Okay, so I'm just putting in some basic data here, including a zip code. Okay, so on my panel card I'm going to have there, and I want to add a button. So I'm going to go down to Other Controls, Set Button, and on that button what I want to do is I'm going to add an action JavaScript, and what's great is there's a whole bunch of map methods built into it. So I'm going to include Google Map Method. So when a person clicks this, it's going to adjust that map, and so I can add a marker to the map. Now I could have typed in the one right here, or what I can do, which is very powerful, which is why I showed this, is I can say get it controls on the component, and let's look at these controls there. Okay, so now I'm going to click OK, and then what I want to do is I'm going to add another action, and I'm going to set a panel action. So what's going to happen is when I click that, it's going to set that second panel card, panel card 1, I believe it is, because I created it first, to there. So now when I go in my working preview, and I'll go ahead and do something very nice looking there, I can click button, and you'll notice that it's updating, and hopefully this will work here. I'm sitting in Austin, Texas, and this is just a random place in Austin, Texas. But now I can go back to my previous side. I can go into my working preview here, and let's say I want to make that Boston, Massachusetts. Let's say make that New York, New York. And let's see how smart this is. And I'm not going to give it a zip code. Let's see what happens there. Pretty good. It's probably not accurate. There's the Long Island Freeway. So as you can see, and there's the JFK Airport. So that's just a made-up location there. So the answer is yes. You can create these map components on your UXs. Then you can either fix their locations, or what's cool is you can create buttons and pull data from a database. You could pull data from here. You could make a server-side call back to the server and do that. Many, many different ways you want to do that. So very straightforward, very easy, very powerful. And what's cool too is these maps, you can actually get your current location and grab it from the phone. So it literally shows where you're at on the map and then shows the other things on the map at the same time.
Great. Well, we are over time, unfortunately, but I want to thank everyone who participated today, especially people who asked us questions. And if you do have additional questions, please send them to me, which would be at guides, Guides, at alphasoftware.com. We'll make sure that they make it off to the right person to get them answered. So thank you again for attending. Thank you very much, Dion, for presenting. And we hope to
Thank
see you
you.
soon at a future webinar. Take care and goodbye.